Can you afford to own a TBM? All about that airplane in the hangar. Welcome to In the Hangar. I'm Christy Wong.
And I'm Dan Milliken. In the Hangar is brought to you by great sponsors like MPS Protects, Marshall Protective Services. We're going to have more about our sponsors below, and we're going to talk about them at the end.
But first, I want to talk about the TBM because this is a really cool airplane.
Well, yes, I've seen them live and up close and wonder if I can ever afford to fly one.
Well, who better to talk about the TBM than Joe Casey?
Joe, I think you've been on the show before.
Once or twice.
Once or twice.
Thanks for coming back. Joe, just so people understand, what are your bona fides as far as the TBM?
Well, we manage and fly TBM amongst King Airs and PA-46s as well. So we fly the TBM a lot. It's a TBM 930, and we train in all of those airplanes. So we probably train somewhere near 50 TBM clients every year.
Okay.
And,
Well, let's talk about the TBM for people that don't know. Let's break down the aircraft. What kind of airplane is a TBM?
Well, it's a six-place turboprop airplane.
Okay.
It's literally at the top end of what I would consider the owner-flown world. That's not a jet. So if you're moved from a piston, you could go up to a turbine. It would be at the top end of that
So
turbine.
like a PC-12?
PC-12's there too, but a PC-12 is a big airplane with a lot of space, cargo.
Bigger than a six-person.
It's a wonderful airplane, but it's also 260 knots, and the top end TBMs are doing almost 320 knots.
So TBMs are faster than the Pilatus.
Oh yeah, by a significant margin.
Well, what about like the difference between a TBM and like the PA-46?
Well, there's less difference. Like if you have a Meridian or an M600 and a TBM, there's going to be some differences inside there. The TBM is just known to be a very robust, a great wing, very high VMO. It's an airplane that really has a lot of load carrying capability, the ability to go very, very far. A lot of the PA-46s are probably slightly less in robustness is the feel you would get with a PA-46 versus a TBM. The TBM's just it's like a tank with a turboprop on the front of it. It's just a very, very solid airplane.
Well, you mentioned high VMO. What are some other reasons why I would want to own a TBM?
TBM,
It can hold Chewy.
It can hold Chewy, yes.
Well, the TBM is an airplane that if you have the higher versions, let's say an 850 or a 9XX, meaning one of the 900 series, it's a true airplane where you can there's 6 seats, but you could easily put 5 people, put a gob of fuel, go 1,000 nautical miles, and do over 300 knots. So there's a lot to like when you consider a TBM as far as why you should want one. Great support. They have a great OPA, meaning an owner and pilot association. So it's an airplane that you can buy, you can fly, and you will definitely be able to. It's a utilitarian airplane that'll do a lot.
What is the difference between the 800 series and the 900 series?
Really what it is a redesigned front end, meaning that there's a lot of wasted air, if you want to think of it this way, in some airframes. Probably the most famous wasted air airplane would be a Piper Meridian or an M600, where you have an ice door that's always on, basically a front end where the air comes in and we divert a bunch of the air. And of course, the lack of efficient flow around of air over an airplane causes drag and causes the engine to produce less horsepower. Interestingly, Daher, which is the parent company that makes the TBM, they've been fantastic about reducing what's called interference drag, basically where you have flows around an airframe that if they're not streamlined in the penalty of extra drag that you have of this air that are competing with each other, end up with slower speeds and less performance. Well, what Daher's been able to do, both with the TBM and the Kodiak, if you look at the newest Kodiaks, that basically redesigned the airplane so there's less interference drag and the airplane goes faster. Well, basically what TBM was able to do, Daher was able to do with the TBM was redesign the front end so that the inlet, the way the air enters into the engine is more streamlined and goes more directly into the engine, so the engine's fed air better, if that makes sense, and goes faster. So the 900 series simply is just a more efficient airplane.
Okay, you're a good salesman. You've made me want to buy a TBM for sure. So you've given me every reason why it's great. Maybe what are some reasons why I wouldn't want it?
You know, probably the biggest one is it's expensive.
Okay.
How
That would
expensive are we talking?
We're talking about a lot of money. I mean, if you get a TBM 900 series, you're gonna spend over $4 million. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay, now we're in the
That's the low
Pilates.
end. I mean,
now
you
we're
get-
in the Pilates kind of
Right. I mean, that's the low
ballpark.
end. A newer one's over $5 million. So we've helped several people buy TBM 900 series, and it's a big ticket to get into the game.
Yeah, that's a big ticket.
I know King Airs and Citations that sell for less
Well,
than that.
that's the point, is that
Okay.
if you're going to if you want a TBM, you're basically saying, I love efficiency. In other words, you're willing to buy something with a big ticket price at the front end. The acquisition price is expensive, but the operational price is arguably less expensive.
All right, so I've talked to Mark Patey, who they used to have a Citation, and they downsized to the PC-12 for that very reason.
Correct.
The Citation was miserable operating expenses. I mean,
There's-
that was where the money was being spent. They spent a bigger amount on the front end and have a smaller operation fee.
Yeah, if you have good cash flow and you can buy the airplane, gain the asset, and you're willing to have that money invested in an asset, not sitting in the bank collecting interest or doing whatever. If you're willing to dump the money into there, the TPM can be a good option because you're feeding one engine. Anytime you have two tanks feeding one engine, you know you're going to have an efficient airplane. And so as compared to a multi-engine airplane, we have one tank feeding one engine, you're going to have a less efficient airplane for sure.
What's the max operating altitude for the TBM?
Yeah, it depends on if you can go RVSM or not. The RVSM, you can go up into the 30s with the TBM. The
RVSM, just for those who don't know, explain that.
reduced vertical separate, or
Reduce vertical
For all of us that fly
separation.
below the flight level.
separation minima.
Yes.
Is the idea, if you want to go over flight level 280, your airplane has to be RVSM. When you're RVSM, your airplane has to be qualified to go up high, and the pilot has to be trained to be able to go
And
up
there's a
high.
list of qualifications like dual channel autopilot and
Is that an
stuff like
endorsement to go up higher?
The pilot has
That's
an
what I mean.
endorsement. The airplane also has to be RVSM approved to be able to do it. So, and you can, but the idea behind it, any turbine airplane, the higher you go,
The more fuel efficient it is.
that's right. And it doesn't necessarily mean the faster you go. So if you go up very, very high in a TBM or any of these other airplanes, it might not be the fastest speed, but that fuel burn is certainly going down. And so if you want to be most efficient on a flight, oftentimes you want to go very, very high to be able to get up there, either to go catch a nice tailwind or just simply to suck less fuel.
So it would behoove you to get the RVSM qualifications for the airplane so that you could do it.
Have lower operating costs.
Argument, I'm going to give you an example of where it's not. If you look at a Piper Meridian or an M600, the cabin pressure is 5.5 differential pressure. So if you get RVSM qualified, you can go up a couple thousand extra feet, which is not that much. In other words, you can go up to 300, but you have to go get your airplane RVSM qualified. The pilot has to be RVSM qualified. Is it worth it for 2,000 feet?
Right.
Because you have a cabin pressure now above 10,000. Not so good. We have a Blackhawk King Air 300 which has a much higher cabin pressure, and we go up into the 30s every time in that airplane, no question whatsoever, just because that's where the fuel burns less.
Okay. So assuming that I'm RVSM qualified, the airplane's qualified, how high could I go in the TBM?
I've taken them up to flight level 310 without any trouble whatsoever.
Okay.
And you could probably go higher than that, but I wouldn't, because the
Gotcha.
speed begins to go down.
Right.
And if you're buying a TBM, especially a 900 series, you want to go fast.
Okay. So then presumably we're looking at, if we just decide not to do the RVSM, 270, 280 would probably be a good altitude for that airplane.
And it'll perform it'll be very fast there.
Which is, I was going to say, that's actually very comparable to a King Air, like
Yeah.
a King Air 200, for example. So,
Yeah, if you look at and really this is the place that you're looking for. If you're a person that's considering, okay, what do I want to buy? Do I want a TBM? Well, one of the problems with a TBM is that the maintenance schedule is fairly heavy. You're going to do an A, B, and a C inspection, and when that C comes around, it's going to be a big ticket item. Now, other airplanes have inspection criteria that are requirements that are higher as well. King Air, you're going to do a gear inspection every 6 years. But the TBM is definitely a higher maintenance item airplane, if you want to think of it that way. And so there's just the cost. So if you're going to look for a TBM, You might look for a King Air because a King Air is going to have more seats, more engines. If you fly over the Rocky Mountains, if you live in the Rockies, having that second engine just gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Does the King Air have more carrying capacity weight-wise than a TBM?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So there may be, so you have to look at your typical mission. If your typical mission is, I carry 4 people and go 1,000 nautical miles, well, the TBM may be a great airplane. Meridian might work as well, or an M600 might work as well. So you really need to look at the idea of how much money do I want to use for acquisition, and then what do I want to use for my operating costs. Meridian M600 is going to be your cheapest operating cost. TBM is going to be higher. King Air is going to be arguably more, but there are some, like a King Air 90 versions can be very efficient because you have smaller engines, but there's 2 of them.
Right.
So the whole idea of a TBM is we're going to put a big engine on front and we're just going to blast our way through the air. Even though we have a wing that's not the most aerodynamic wing, we got a big thick wing, big strong wing, we're just basically muscling ourselves through the air is
Right.
what a TBM is doing.
You mentioned the Meridian M600, and we've been talking about cost. So we know the high end to get into a TBM is $5 million. If I wanted to get into a Meridian M600 or something, what am I looking at cost-wise?
About $1 million to $1.5 million less for a comparable
Oh,
airplane.
just less, not $1 million.
I was going to say
less.
$1 million. I could swing that.
Yeah.
Easy.
Well, what's really coming out, here not very long ago, Piper announced the M700. Okay, now you've got a real competitor to the TBM out there. Well, that airplane's going to be $1 million less brand new off the floor. And as that airplane ages, if you look at the M600, those airplanes today, a low-end M600 can be purchased for $2.2 million. It's a lot of money. But a comparable TBM will be a TBM 700 or 700C2, and you're talking about an airplane that's 20 years old. So a big difference in age, and so you can get a lot more new airplane in an M600, and you're going to pay more in that TBM range.
Right. So let's say I can't afford the $5 million. Just assume that for a minute.
You're just off by that much.
Just go with me for a minute. If I can't afford that, and I want a TBM, the 700, if I go and look for a 20, 30-year-old plane, what am I looking at cost-wise to get into?
The TBM 700A, 700B, you're going to be in the low 1 point something million,
Okay.
depending upon the.
It's still going to be seven figures.
It's gonna
Like
be
it's
seven.
anything with a PT6 is going to be seven figures.
That's it.
Yeah.
And today, well, there are a few out there that are not, and a few other.
But
type
you might
of-
not want that PT6.
Correct. If you're going for a TBM
Yeah.
if you're going for a TBM 700 series, you're really looking at comparable Meridian is what you're really looking for. The break is when you get to a 700C2. If I had the golden child of the TBM series, in my personal opinion, is a 700C2, because now you get an airplane that still goes fast, and all they did move it from the A to the B is a better air conditioning system and a much better payload. So now you get an airplane that you can truly load up 5 people, full fuel, go 1,000 nautical miles, and do 285 knots.
You mentioned something at the very top of the show, and you used the phrase that the TBM is at the top of the part where you have an owner pilot. So I'm guessing that at some point you get to a plane that's just too much for the lawyer, the doctor, that kind of thing to just jump in and fly. Is that a real concern, or what can people do that really want to keep flying, but maybe they don't fly regularly enough? I mean, is there training? What kind of stuff do you do to help them?
We hit this place a lot where usually there's one of 2 people that enter into and that have trouble. Number one is the person that owns a business and they're just so busy that they don't devote enough time to flying. If you're not going to fly yourself 100 hours a year, don't do it. Don't just if you're not going to fly 100 hours a year,
Because it's a lot of airplane.
that's right. Don't buy this airplane at all. Just get somebody else to fly you around, and that's all there is to it. The other person is somebody that ages out. And this is a real problem because in the world today, as a pilot, the FAA is not going to come take your license because you're older. It's not going to happen now. The place you hit it is the medical. And a lot of people will hit a place where they can't get past a medical, so they can't fly anymore. But there's a lot of people that they can still get a medical, but they really don't need to be flying. The older we get, the more we slow down, but now we're trying to fly technically advanced airplanes that are going really fast and carrying a lot of stuff. And there is a place where somebody needs to step out of that left seat and move into the back or move into the right seat and have a professional pilot fly in the left seat. And that's totally dependent upon the specific person. But I tell you, we see it a lot. And you see it a lot in places where people have plenty of money and not a lot of aviation sense.
Right.
It is a problem.
I guess if you can afford a TBM 9XX, you can afford a pilot.
That's right. And you might even think, once you've hit that space, okay, if I'm going to hire a pilot, I might want to hire a pilot and get a bigger
King
airplane.
Air,
Yeah,
yeah.
you might, because then now you got something that'll carry more. Because the minute you put that pilot on board, now you just took your useful load down because
person, yeah.
Right. So now if you move up to a bigger airplane that has more useful load, so you can buy a King Air 90 or a 200 and have a pilot and carry even more than you would in a TBM. So if you're going to move out, there's I would say in the PA-46 world, probably 95+% are owner flown. You go to the TBM world, it's still 85. It's a high number. When you go to the King Air world, it's probably 30%.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
a lot more owner flown in the PA-46 TBM world of this high-end owner flown.
All right. Well, when I win the lotto, when I win the lotto, I will come to you for sure to discuss my personal airplane
Yeah,
needs.
but the only problem, Christy, is that I know that you have a bias towards Piper.
I
so I
do.
could see you going.
I do.
I could see you going the M700, and I'll get the TBM.
That's fair. I am a Piper fan.
When you buy it, I'll teach you to fly it.
All right.
See? Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Joe, for coming on again.
Appreciate it. It's been great to be
We'll
here.
have to have you back.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. Dan, we've got some really great sponsors we'd like to thank.
Like Z-Vision, xevision.com, the brightest taxi landing lights out there. Marshall Protective Services, Personal Protection Elevated, MPSprotects.com, Colton Mortgage, ColtonTakingOff.com, also Flying Eyes. If you go to FlyingEyesOptics.com, you'll get the best glasses for under headsets and helmets. Use our discount code TakingOff, all caps, one word, for 10% off. And Jerry at ClemensInsurance.net has saved me a lot of money in my insurance.
Did you remember 67
67
designs? I
designs.
got him.
67D.com, the best camera mounts, iPhone mounts, iPad mounts that you can have in your plane and in your car or boat too. So 67D.com.
And of course, we couldn't do this without you guys, the viewers. So thank you so much for supporting us. Please like, subscribe, share our content. We'll see you all next time.
In the hangar.